My next guest is a lightweight contender from Queensland, Australia, and you can catch his next fight on September 9th when he takes on Jack Becker. That happens at Eternal MMA 78 in Sydney, Australia. He joins me now. He's the former two-time Eternal MMA lightweight champion, my friend, the smiling assassin, David Martinez. Mr. Martinez, welcome, sir. It's always a treat, always a pleasure to have you on the show, my friend.
Oh, thank you, brother. Hopefully, down the track, you'll be calling me a three-time eternal lightweight champion.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to that. You have a very difficult opponent, but before we get into all that mess, happy birthday! You just turned 30. I wanted to wish you a happy birthday.
Oh, thank you, brother. Thank you.
You've been doing this. You've been competing in mixed martial arts since 2011, and by my count, that's a many years to have vested in this sport. And I was hoping we can kind of reflect back Australian MMA from 2011 to now here we are almost 2024. Can you kind of like give me your from your perspective what's changed in Australian MMA for the better part of the past 11 or 12 years?
Well, yeah, it certainly does seem like a completely different landscape now. I remember, like, although my first fight was 2011, and I actually didn't start training till about halfway through 2012 is when I first started actually training for the sport. But yeah, no, it just seems like the regional scene has really picked up, especially with shows like Eternal or getting fight pass deals and a lot more exposure happening, and as well as like it forces all the other promotions to really step up their game and in order to even remain and well, not really competitive at this stage, but relevant uh, type thing.
David, I did want to ask you, like, when I look at it, it's like, okay, you're 30 years old, that you're in your athletic prime at this moment right now. Like you're in your athletic prime and you could realistically fight at an elite level for the next 5, 6 years, possibly even longer. But when I look at it, like on average, that's probably a pretty good like benchmark when you think about it. And I did want to ask you throughout your entire journey to date, we in the media and fans, we always think about like the wins, the losses, the championships, all that other stuff. But what have you learned about yourself through this entire journey?
That's a question I can't really fully answer, man. It's that sort of thing changes over time. I don't know, I remember way back, I watched that movie Never Back Down. That's what got me into the sport. I was like, oh, that looks cool. I might give it a shot. Went down, had a fight, no training, got smashed. Freaking found a gym eventually, started training. I was like, you know what? This is awesome. And then yeah, just training, fighting, and going through different stages with it. Toward the end of my amateur career, I was starting to feel like, oh, I'm tired of fighting and not getting paid for it, type thing. And I feel like I let that sort of get in the way a little, and said the money shouldn't matter. But at that point, I started to make it matter. I was wanting to get paid, and then I was wanting to get paid more, or then I was, upset because, or us regional fighters are getting paid crumbs to fight. But it's like, yeah, yeah, maybe the promotions could pay us a bit more, but the fact is, it shouldn't be your primary concern.
Mm.
And if you like, it is on you to put yourself in a position where you can be looked after financially and you can pursue the sport that you want to engage in. It is on you. It's your responsibility. It's not the promoter's responsibility. It's not or your gym's responsibility or anyone else's. It's on you to find a way to put yourself in a position where you can financially support yourself, your family if you have one, um, and yeah, and as well as pursuing the passion you love. But that was a problem I ran into where I sort of I let the thought of having to make money start to take over, and and for the most part, it just sucks the joy out of doing it.
When you monetize a passion, you have to really be wary of that because it all of a sudden stops becoming a passion and just starts becoming a regular job of sorts.
Yeah, yeah. I remember they I can't remember the names of the researchers, but they did an experiment where they had these students divided into two groups, and they had them solving puzzles, type thing. Now, one group they just left alone, and like each day they'd come in and they'd solve puzzles, and they just left them to continue like that. This other group, though, what they started doing was they started at one point they introduced like a monetary reward for the amount of puzzles that they solved, type thing. And so they brought that in, and what they found is initially bringing that in, and the students were more motivated to solve these puzzles. But then they took that reward away, and the motivation to solve the puzzles just plummeted. Yeah, whereas the other group who was left alone, they just continued on as is. Yeah, but these guys were just so demotivated that they couldn't be bothered doing it anymore. Oh,
One of the things that I think is maybe it's more relevant up here stateside, or maybe it's just a totally different set of cards in Australia. But you'll see like these big regional promotions in the states. They'll go to these prospects and they'll be like, "Hey, we really like you. We want to give you a 4-fight deal, and in this 4-fight deal, we'll throw in monetary rewards in here. So we'll increase your contract over time if the results are there and you're winning." And you'll see these very young prospects like really lock in with a regional promotion for 4 5 maybe even more fights than that. And it's like, yes, the money's good and it's nice to get promoted and stuff like that, but also at the same time, for me, I look at them and I'm just like, but is that the wisest move? Because if somebody else comes calling, it could get complicated. If you want to leave and pursue other opportunities, you might not be able to, depending on how your contract's written.
yes,
And
yeah.
for the money to just kind of be the thing that kind of like grabbed you in and sucked you in like that, it's like, oh man, was that a wise move?
Especially like in the short term. Like it seems like a great idea in the short term, but long term it could cause problems.
Right.
Type thing. I personally like I'm against any sort of contract regionally.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't think regional promotion should be like trying to sign you exclusively to them, type thing. I know a couple of the shows around Australia tried doing that, but shit, that just it fell through.
Yeah.
It did not go favorably with the fighters, and yeah, they, as far as I'm aware, they've since stopped doing that as a
Well,
result.
here stateside, we could take a page out of that book. I hope they do that as well. Oftentimes, you'll hear about promotions up here that'll be like they'll dangle a belt in front of somebody, and it's like, hey, we'll let you challenge for the belt, but it comes with a 3-fight deal, and it's like, oh man, like and
Yeah,
then is that really worth it or not? And maybe for some fighters the answer is yes, but then for others, depending on where you are in your career and just kind of what makes sense for you, may not make the most amount of sense. So that there's
yeah,
that dynamic too.
yes. I mean, like if they're gonna do something like that, like you want a good track record of that promotion's titles type thing. For instance, being in Australia, it's quite obvious that holding the Eternal title for a little bit leads to possibly going into the Contender Series and things like that. And so, it has a good track record. Therefore, if Eternal's like, oh, okay, if you win the belt, well, you got to sign like an exclusive deal with us for a couple fights. Like, at least that makes sense because of the track record or of holding an Eternal title.
David, I wanted to shift. I wanted to talk about you specifically. I feel like 2022, like from the tail end of 2022 to present, there's been a lot that's been going on with you. Your health has been compromised. You've had to withdraw from fights. You fell short against Blake Donnelly, and then you rebounded by winning your most recent bout. But like, I think of you, and I think of like adversity, like right away. I think about adversity in the cage, and I think about adversity outside the cage. There's probably a lot of things that have happened that most people don't even know about. I was hoping that you could talk about just kind of the obstacles you've been encountering over the past year or so.
Yeah, man. Well, it all started after. It literally started the week after I fought Aguilera for the title. Uh, so I managed to reclaim the lightweight title, felt on top of the world, and then freaking, and I ended up getting like really bad gastro
Mm-hmm.
uh, within that week, and it was just health wise, it was all downhill from there. Just one thing after another, like massive flus, cellulitis in my face, and just on constant like courses of antibiotics, and nothing seemed to work. And yeah, just weeks turned into months, and it was just constantly sick all the time, and with no real, even now, no real explanation as to why that was the case. And so that was difficult. Well, I mean, for me, like trying to train through all that stuff, uh, that probably did not help in hindsight. That was probably one of the main reasons a lot of my illnesses were prolonged when I got them. Because I just kept trying to push through, just making myself either worse or just stuck in the same spot, stuck on a treadmill, so to speak.
You have health challenges outside the cage. You fight Blake Donnelly. You're not the type of guy that's going to say a whole lot. Like you'll just be like, "Hey, he was the better man. He won, and that's that." Like that's the type of guy that you are. So I know you're not really one for making excuses or alibis, any of that sort. But in the aftermath of all of that, when you look back on that, where like I did kind of want to ask you, and maybe it's a difficult question to ask, but it's like, were you healthy for that fight?
Well, if I'm going to be honest, no, I wasn't very healthy for that fight. But at the same time, like you said, man, I'm not here to say it would have changed anything.
As far as the in-cage performance is concerned, like was there something that you highlighted that like, no, these are the things that I want to fix before I compete again? Like these are the problem areas, these are the things that I don't like that I see. Did you diagnose something like that when you go back and watch that fight today?
Yeah, man. It was more to do with the preparation side of things for that fight. It's simply because of the health concerns and stuff. It's kind of like it was very poorly managed on my part.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, trying to trying to push through with training, while sick, just ended up prolonging it. In some cases, making it worse. So, and when you're going into a 5 round title fight, you need cardio, you need the conditioning, and the fact that like mine just could not pick uh, up during the training camp due to being sick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in hindsight, I would have been better staying in bed.
So, and that begets a really good question because I watched that fight not that long ago, and I looked at it, and I was, I kind of like had my theories when I watched the fight the first time live, and then now the second time I watch it, and maybe knowing a little bit more now today than I did back then, I was like, I wonder if David is looking at this fight thinking to himself, like, I got to finish this guy. This fight has got to get down the ground. I got to freaking choke him out because, like, 25 minutes, like, that might be a bridge too far. Almost in a way, it's like you're almost removing a lot of layers of strategy, a lot of layers of unpredictability, things that you would do, things that I'm accustomed to seeing you do. Everything just seemed a lot more, I don't know if hurried's the right word, but like, I don't know. I look at that fight the second time and I'm just like, man, he's probably not healthy and he's probably having to do things that he typically wouldn't do if he was 100%.
Yeah, I was leading into it, man. I had it in my mind that I'm like, right, I've got 2 rounds, and I remember in the second round, I was a little bit felt a little better to me. The first round, I just rushed a number of things, yeah, and looking back on, it, I'm like, oh, there's just some key details that I would normally go for, or like in some of the grappling exchanges and such, that I just didn't do. Uh, I was like, what? I managed to apply them toward the end of the second round, and like, yeah. it worked a bit better. But by then, and I'm already compromised. I've given up my best energy rushing, and then and then by the third round, I'm just like, oh man.
So the Blake fight, that goes the way that it does. That happens back in March, and then on 1 July you fight Kieran Joblin, Eternal MMA 77. This is a fella with a ton of fights, a ton of experience, highly trained. And you look at it and it's just like, wow, this guy has been in the MMA business for a long time. Those New Zealand fellas, they know a thing or two about kickboxing. Very highly, he comes from one of the most prestigious gyms on the planet. And I circled this fight. I looked at this. And I was like, this guy might this might be an interesting fight to watch. Like, and for David, for you in particular, I looked at it and I was just like, I think for David, this is a risky fight because if he wins, I don't know if he's going to get a proper due from it. But if he loses, then everyone's going to make a big deal out of it. Oh, now all of a sudden the former champion is two in the hole now. And I was curious, like when you look at the matchup, feeling pressure, you feel that um, this was like a high risk, low reward sort of fight going up against Joblin.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, it was for me, man. It was a very interesting match in the sense that our strengths and weaknesses kind of lined up with each other, very similar to each other. So it was just a matter of who could capitalize on what. So yeah, and the big thing though was I think he hadn't fought in about 2 years or just over 2 years. So then
What a
there's
fool!
always there's always that sort of sense that, oh man, they haven't fought in this long. What have they been working on? Because you can tell from his Instagram, the man's always in shape. So he's always training. It's not like he was off doing nothing for those 2 years, type thing. So it's always it's hard because then you try to watch tape on them, you try to study them. Then they haven't fought for 2 years, and you don't know what you're going up against.
So interesting point. I would have lost a lot of money on this fight because I never would have guessed in a million years that he would have shot on you. I never would have guessed that in a million years. He's the one that expresses a willingness to test you in the grappling and in the wrestling department. I never would have guessed that. It completely threw me for a loop. And were you surprised, like during that bout, like his willingness to wrestle you, his willingness to engage with the grappling, did that kind of throw you by surprise a little bit?
To be honest, I, I feel like I was the only one who wasn't surprised by it. Just because, yeah, yeah, I still had that sort of sense. No, he hasn't fought in 2 years. He could be a completely different guy, but I know that he has very good grappling instincts. But and sometimes, sometimes your instincts take over, regardless of what your intentions are. So even though even if he like full on intended to have a kickboxing match with me, I knew his grappling instincts would get the better of him, and he tried to imply like use that on me. And it's funny, like the exact positions I drilled or leading into that one were the ones he sort of tried to put me through. So I was like, I remember him like suplexing me up and I'm like getting face planted. I'm like, yep, saw this coming.
It definitely threw me by surprise. And it seemed like he was the one that wanted to like engage in the grappling early on, and you were the one that was kind of content to kickbox him for a while. You were throwing combinations at him. You weren't really showing any hint of a level change right away. It seemed like you were just content to stand in the pocket and feel him out a little bit. And so I thought the first round was crazy in that initial setup, and then you almost end the entire fight on multiple occasions. I saw you sink in a rear naked choke on him that looked well. Actually, multiple times you had him in that, and I'm just still amazed that he was able to wiggle free from that because I thought you had him dead to rights.
Bro, at one stage, that thing was sunk deeper than the Grand Canyon, and the man still got out. I was like, what?
I mean,
I remember,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I remember sitting once it. There was like 3 or 4 occasions where I'm like putting on the squeeze, and I'm like feeling like this is it, and he somehow got out. One of them, I think, was a palm to palm, and like, oh, he just sat out in the right spot and freaking ruined it. And I remember sitting there like after like my arms are slightly gassed. I'm trying to hand fight a bit, and all I can hear is Eugene and Behrman freaking calling out, uh, like, oh, you get on top of his thumb, freaking da da da. And I'm like, shut up, Behrman. One, one of the greatest coaches over there in the corner there, telling this guy while my arms are tired. And I'm like, oh, bro, please, please.
So that is exactly what I was going to ask you. So he survives the first round, and then so going into the second round, like were your arms just completely cooked?
Yeah, sometimes they take a bit to bounce back, bro. I try my best to make sure, like, I look like, oh, everything's all fine, everything's golden, uh, type thing. But my arms are like, yeah, brother, we need another minute here.
Well, any in any event you go on, you get a unanimous decision victory over a seasoned opponent, and that must have been, a welcome sight, like a breath of fresh air. Where you performed, you put on a great show, you get another win back in that win column. That had to have felt good, considering everything that you've been through over the past year or so.
Oh, heck yeah, man! Like, especially for me, the experience of fighting someone like Kieran Joblin, and in and of itself is just incredible. I mean, pulling out the win and everything just makes it a bit sweeter, of course. But yeah, just the experience of it was awesome.
After beating Kieran, at what point does Eternal MMA contact you with this opportunity to fight in September? Like, was that part of the plan? Was this something that you kind of knew was on the horizon with the UFC going to Sydney, or can you kind of talk me through how you got this opportunity to fight in springtime?
To be honest, man, I did suspect being on the September card, but I honestly thought it'd be for the title.
Mm.
Uh, for some, I think some people spoke about Kieran and me being like a contender fight. Now, Eternal never actually stated that. Uh, was as far as I'm told, they didn't. And but other people had, and it kind of got in my head that okay, yeah, whichever one of us wins, we'll fight Soul Killed for the title in September. And yeah, yeah, that's what I was waiting to hear back from. And then they come back with Jack Becker. And I was like, wait, what? Uh, yeah,
So that was exactly what I was going to ask you. If you were surprised that you weren't going to get an opportunity to fight Saul Kill, because that to me seemed like that was going to be on the horizon. Like obviously, I don't. It really wouldn't make sense to give Blake another opportunity considering how that fight went. I think Blake would need to string together a couple wins to get back into contention. That's for sure. You just won a matchup there. So for me, it was like, okay, well, I could maybe see um, David and somebody else to potentially get a opportunity, but like Jack, I that was a name that kind of threw me off a little bit because I didn't know he was coming back, and here he is.
yeah. Well, I that was the big part, man. I just wasn't. I always knew he'd come back eventually. I just wasn't sure it'd be this soon. And so when they threw his name at me for September, and I'm like, at first I was really confused. I'm like, okay, Jack's coming back. I'm fighting him. Who the heck is Soul Kill fighting? And then lo and behold, Soul Kill's not even on the card. He's scheduled to defend his title in October. And I'm like, oh, what? What
So
is going?
So as far as I am aware, from what I discern, because I watch Toby's show sometimes, and I watched Toby interview somebody. He may have actually interviewed Soul Killed. I could be wrong, but he talked to somebody about this recently, and I'm bringing it up because he's fighting on Road to UFC.
Yes, he's
So,
actually fighting. I think it's today.
well, good luck to him.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that's kind of weird because now it's like, okay, well, now that he has that opportunity, now as far as the eternal lightweight division, it's just kind of like, okay, well, do you guys fight for an interim belt? Like, because who knows what's going on with him? Like, if he loses, he's still the champion and can come back and defend. But if he wins, then it's like, what's going on now?
Yeah, it is an interesting situation. Not, I'm not too sure, man. You'd have to talk to one of the people higher up in the Eternal. Oh, oh yeah.
Yeah, I think that's in order. But in any event, you are going up against Jack Becker. He's 10-3, like you. He's also had the eternal belt around his waist. A very talented individual, like you. He has definitely put away his fair share of competition through submissions, through knockouts. This is an exciting matchup, and when you think about Jack, like what are the things that you think of, like when you assess your opponent?
Yeah, well, when it comes to Jack, man, like he's a top level competitor, and well-rounded skill set, and at the end of the day, willing to do what needs to be done. And that, very simplistic mindset that's just driven, focused. So someone like him, he's a tricky person to go up against, just because he's just a solid competitor. But at the same time, man, it's a very exciting fight. It's these are it's like when I got to fight Joblin or basically any of these top lightweights, man. These are the moments you live for as a fighter. These are the kind of matchups you want. And I'm very keen to get in there and go head to head with Jack.
For Jack in particular, I did notice that similarity. Like Kieran, it was his first bout back in almost 2 years. For Jack, he's been out of action for the past year and a half or so. Does your preparation, do the challenges of your preparation, is it still somewhat similar in the sense that you're getting a guy that's been sidelined for the better part of a year and some change, and you're not quite sure what you're going to get when you see him?
Yeah, well, that's of course that's the downside to them being out for so long. Now, Jack is a bit different to Kieran in the sense that I'm not too sure why Kieran was out for so long, but I know he was consistently training. Jack had to recover from a pretty horrific injury to begin with, so a good portion of the time that he's been out, he hasn't been able to do much type thing. That being said, uh, still plenty of time out uh, results in like can result in big changes
Mm-hmm.
in terms of like stylistically, as well as just that itch to get back
Mm-hmm.
to the competition. So I think whereas someone like Kieran might have been feeling a bit burnt out toward the end, then as time goes by he rediscovers that fire. Whereas Jack has probably spent that this whole time out just wanting to get back in there. Yeah, and that too can also make things interesting. But it's a very hard thing to gauge. Just to is he going to be the same? Is he going to be different? And 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 as to how to prepare for that exactly.
When I look at it from a neutral lens, I understand the appeal for you because it's like, okay, like a win over another former champion, that is only going to put me in a prime position to contend or put me on the radar for something different. Like for it's easy to connect the dots from your side. But when I look at it from his side, it's like I've been out for a year and a year and a half, and going up against Martinez right away, like that's a tall order. And I don't know. I'd almost want a tune-up fight. Like I know that's taboo. I know that's not something you're allowed to talk about, but I'd want an easy fight at first. And I'm not suggesting he's not a gamer or anything like that, but I am saying a year and a half, that's a long way to be away. And then to fight you as like your welcome back fight, that's a tall order, man. And so I was just kind of like, what were you a little surprised to hear his name of all the names? Was that the one that was kind of like, oh, wow, I didn't think he'd want this?
Yeah, I was just surprised to see his name in the sense that he was coming back this soon. And as for like wanting to jump back in the mix right at the top, like no, that doesn't surprise me. That seems very much like a Jack Becker thing.
David, for you, when you look at the matchup, I did kind of want to, without getting too detailed into matters, where do you feel like you have the biggest advantage over Jack as far as the bout's concerned? Obviously, I think of you. I think of the level changes. I think of grappling. I think of wrestling. But are you just at like a different point in life where you feel like you have other variables and other things swinging in your favor, that other intangibles, if you will, that give you an advantage over your opponent?
Yeah, I feel as though I might be a bit more varied than him. Yeah, in terms of the striking and even like the grappling. In a sense, I feel like I've got more variety going and lately, as opposed to he's quite effective, but still very one note. If yeah, if I can say that, but yeah, I feel as though uh, yeah, I'm getting more varied. I'm getting a bit better with my movement and everything. Yeah, I feel that that will come into effect in the matchup.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking to the former Eternal MMA champion, David Martinez. He'll be fighting on September 9th in Sydney, Australia. No matter where you are in the world, make sure you watch it on UFC Fight Pass. David, I did want to ask you two things before I let you go. Number one, I understand it that you have a new kit that you'll be wearing when you go out to fight. And there's a story behind that. And I would like for you to tell that story about the design behind your kit.
Yeah. So uh, I partnered with Havoc, and they designed this new shirt for me with the Indigenous Australian and sort of pattern, and particularly of the Ayers Rock or Uluru, as it's called. Well, and that's because I grew up in the middle of the Northern Territory most of my life. I was out there for about 17 years after being born. Well, and then I just wanted, I wanted some sort of design that sort of paid homage to that. The fact that I grew up in the desert for all those years. Uh, I'm lately I've been known as the guy from Bundaberg and eventually the Sunshine Coast, but no, I'm actually from the Northern Territory. Yeah, so yeah, with the shirt, it's just nice to pay it a bit of respect.
So, David, we have a new walkout kit. It's the biggest fight in 2023 in Australia from the regional MMA scene. I think it's very, very exciting. There's going to be all kinds of people there from tuning in from all over the world. And then, of course, you're going to have like UFC shot callers there. You're going to see UFC scouts that are at this event, and being able to compete in Sydney the day before a huge MMA card that happens, and it features some of the best mixed martial artists in the world. Like, what a treat, what an opportunity for the UFC scouts, for the people associated with that promotion that are going to be showing up at Eternal to watch you fight. What's something that they can expect to see when you perform?
Well, if my track record has shown anything, man, it'd be the same thing over and over. Uh, Basically, but I mean, like, you're getting an absolute treat watching two of the biggest lightweights go at it. Jack Becker and myself, like, two of the guys near the top, going head to head, freaking grappling, striking, everything, man. Yeah, it's gonna be a big fight.
It's going to be a big fight. It's one that you won't want to miss. And David, I'd be remiss to not give you an opportunity. If If you had a message for any of your supporters, or if there are any sponsors or companies that you need to talk about before I let you go, let's do it.
Oh well, this part I was completely unprepared for, but anyway,
That's why none of
well,
it's live. That's why none of
yeah, well, of course, man. Like, there's my team at Ignite Martial Arts, or Ignite Sunshine Coast, as we're called now, out of the Dunstan Deaf Squad. They've been, as they've always been helping me with every fight, but in this one particularly, they're just behind me 100%, and couldn't be where I am and do what I do without them, man. As well as my coaches, Doyle, my boy, yeah, my boys at Tribal, oh, and yeah, and everyone else, man. Like, it's yeah, it's gonna be a massive fight, and everyone's behind me 100%.
Perfect. Well, David, I appreciate you, champ, giving me some of your time this afternoon. It's always a very special treat to have you on the show. I wish you the best of skill on September 9th, sir. I look forward to having you back very soon.
Awesome, thank you, brother. Thank you for your time.